just about anything that moves. Hold on, I gotta say, got it. They love to eat many things, including waterfowl, waders, hares, rabbits, ground squirrels, corvids, and one of their favorites in the winter are turkeys, especially in the east. And then also prey on much larger animals like deer, and occasionally they're predators of livestock, which can cause issues with Western ranchers. So this is actually a photo that was taken in a cornfield in Illinois. And there's multiple images like this of eagles going after deer. And in a while, you'll understand why they can do this. So their prey includes just about anything that moves or doesn't move. Carrion, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is a staple. But this is a really cool video that a friend sent from Yellowstone. I don't know if you can notice there were, I think, 4 or 5 golden eagles on that carcass. But those carcasses are also visited by fellows like this one. So like I said, carrion is a really important part of their diet. This photo was just taken out in Montana, and it's not the best photo, but because it's too close to the carcass, but there was actually as many as 9 golden eagles on this carcass at one time, which is, I think, a record. But carrion's important regardless of the locale. So this is actually a photo that was taken in West Virginia at a carcass site. And we've driven into these sites and flushed as many as 7 golden eagles out of them. And so when we first started our project in the East, we were trapping birds on migration. Then we tried carrion, and we soon found that tiny openings in the forest were the place that you could attract the most birds. And that was a big surprise to everyone, because most people, when they think of golden eagles, they don't think of eastern forests. They think of the big open areas out west like you all have. And so this was a big surprise, and they continue to surprise us. But the fact that we found them in these small openings led us to start a camera trapping study where we were looking at population size, demography, and distribution of golden eagles in the East during winter. And we ended up having over 200 collaborators and 250 camera traps. And it's actually incredibly remarkable how many of these sites actually had birds show up on them. So we collected a lot of images, many sites with multiple birds, like this one in northern Pennsylvania. This is actually just a road through the forest. There is no real opening. And this year we were lucky enough to get some funding to go out to Arkansas in the Ozarks, and we had as many as 4 golden eagles on camera at once. And in this small area, we had 3 different bait sites, and we've had probably at least 10 or 12 different eagles on those bait sites in the Ozarks. So, I mean, although we've been doing this for a long time, I still I don't know why I'm surprised, but I'm still surprised to see the numbers of birds that we're finding in places that we've never been before, like Arkansas. So sometimes the eagles really show themselves off on camera, just like a model. And I like to call this one America's Next Top Model, because she was really showing off and flaunting her stuff, and even her big stuffed crop when she came up to the camera.
That's very cute.
If you've never seen a golden eagle run up to carrion, it's a real treat. This is in central Pennsylvania. Sometimes they actually attack the deer carcass, but they look really funny when they run up to a carcass. And often this also illustrates that they typically do not land directly on the carcass. They'll land some distance away. And we've had them walk in like down a road several hundred meters from the carcass before jumping on it. So this is how we've caught the majority of eagles in the East. Our collaborators use this method and other trapping methods. And if you haven't talked to Pete Bloom about how he does this, you really should, because he has one of the most interesting methods, and I'd love to actually come out trapping with him sometime. But we set up a bait pile, and then we shoot a net over the bird and go out and get it out of the net. This is in another one of those places where we didn't expect to find so many eagles. This is in Alabama, and it's actually remarkable. We could go to this site and catch 2 birds a day, probably for a week or more at a time. So we actually call these birds the ghosts of the eastern forest, because people simply don't see them, because they're in these places that nobody expects them to be, and where people aren't really. I'll let this video finish up so you can see it. It's amazing, like how once you get them out of the net, how calm they tend to be. Much better than a bald eagle. I'll say that. A bald eagle would try to bite you a lot. Golden eagles will try to get you with their feet. So once we have a bird in hand, then we process them. We put little booties on their feet because we're gonna handle them a lot. To put a telemetry unit on, we'll put a hood on their head. We take measurements. We use a yardstick to take our measurements on their tail and on their wings, just to give you an idea of how big these birds are. We do bill measurements, and we measure their foot pad. The foot pad can be used to differentiate between males and females. And then take a look at this hallux. So that's the hallux is the back claw right here. It's almost as long as Mike's thumb. And that's why a golden eagle can kill a deer. And they can land on the back and then puncture the spinal cord or hit the jugular. Sometimes their feet look just old and weathered. That's why I like this. This looks like an old bird who's done a lot in her lifetime. We also take blood samples. This is my daughter, Phoebe. I think she was 3 or 4 in this picture. She's now 16, almost 16. But she was always a big help in the field. And then we weigh them. And then we put a telemetry unit on them. Here's Phoebe again when she was a baby. She grew up in the blind trapping, and she actually still likes to go in the blind with me here in Cape May. But we put it on like a backpack over the shoulders and around around the wings. And then once we've processed the birds and have the telemetry unit on, we let them go. And this is in Georgia, where we caught this bird in a very foggy day, but off it flew. We've tagged about 99 birds in the East, and I'm not exactly sure how many in the West. We have projects in Wyoming, California, and Alaska. And so these are the tracks of the birds that we've tagged and captured over the last 16 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned from our tracking data. First, we're going to look at the different migration patterns, because these differ between populations. So this is some preliminary work done by a PhD student, Lori Maynard, at the University de Moncton in New Brunswick, Canada. She did a really nice job summarizing the differences in migration of adult eagles, of 2 subpopulations in eastern Canada, and the Alaskan population. So there's a population that breeds here in the southeast of Canada, and then a population that breeds up here in more northerly distribution, and then the Alaskan population up here. Can you see my cursor when I do this? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So what she's found is that migration distances, that the northern populations migrate similar distances, but the Alaskan birds are breeding further north and also wintering further north. And conversely, that southeastern subpopulation in southern Quebec migrates very short distances, and they breed at the lowest latitude. Those birds may migrate only 900 kilometers compared to several thousand for the Alaskan and northern Canada populations. The northeast population is kind of breeding at latitudes between those two and winters the furthest south. So those birds we find down in down into Florida. In general, the birds breeding the furthest south migrate earlier during spring and later during fall. So that is this southeast population in purple. So and some of these birds don't migrate at all. So they'll sometimes skip migration. So they may migrate one year and not the next. And we don't exactly understand the drivers of that, but that's one thing that Lori is going to be looking at in her PhD work. So that the northeastern birds have the most protracted migration window during spring. So they, up here in spring migration, they migrate, the adults are going from mid-March until mid-April, whereas the Alaskan birds, Carol McIntyre, who we work with up in Denali, she says if those birds are not on eggs by April 15th, then they're not going to make it, or they're not going to be successful. And so, and let's see, then the Alaskan birds have the most protracted migration window during fall. So they're migrating over a very long time period compared to the northeastern birds. So we found that migration timing is influenced by several factors: weather, climate, and age. At a population level, Davidson et al. Found that migration timing in Alaska was linked to the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is similar to, or sometimes described as, a sort of long-lived El Nino or Southern Oscillation. So I think everybody tends to know what the El Nino is. Because these oscillations are expected to change with climate change, we expect that golden eagles will be affected in one way or another. So specifically, they found that the onset of summering, especially of a subadult, was linked to that oscillation. We find that not only are there population level effects on movement, but also individual effects of weather. So at the individual scale, eagles are selecting conditions that support thermal development and reduce the cost of migration. But that's not the only part of the story, because we also know that age influences the time of spring migration, but not fall migration. So we see that adults will, their fitness is improved if they can arrive on the breeding grounds early. They want to get up there soon enough that they can defend their territory, defend their nest sites. But if they get up there too early, they may not have enough food to eat. But juveniles and subadults do not have that same pressure on them. So they tend to wait until they can benefit from thermal development. So early in spring, there's not a lot of thermals, not a lot of updrafts that are going to support flight. So if they wait longer, then they can improve their survival by waiting for conditions that are going to support reduced energetic costs of migration. And then during fall, there's no real age correlation. Nobody has to leave to defend a winter territory or things like that, generally speaking. And so they can all wait until they have the best conditions to migrate. So this is a little video I put together just showing the timing of migration. So the adults are in blue, subadults are in purple, and juveniles are in orange. And you can see that the adults are all vacating the wintering grounds about the same time, followed by subadults, and then the juveniles last. As a matter of fact, some juveniles will stay until mid-May before they head north. And then when we see them coming back south, there's no real correlation between that pattern of migration. You get some very early birds, but in general, all those birds are vacating that breeding area around the same time. So when we look at patterns of our migration routes, we see that leading lines influence migration routes. And these occur at different scales. So at very broad scales, you'll see birds following like mountain ranges. They follow the birds from Alaska will follow the edge of the eastern edge of the Rockies down to their wintering areas. At finer scales, we'll find that eagles follow ridge lines like those of the Appalachian Mountains. This is through Pennsylvania, where you have individuals just shooting down these ridge lines. And then they'll also follow shorelines, but this is influenced by season of the year. So here we have in blue spring migration tracts, and in fall, orange. The orange are the fall migration tracts. And you can see here that birds that are migrating south during fall follow the northwest shoreline of Lake Superior. And then those that are migrating north will hit that southern shoreline and follow it around and then break off and head south in a much more broad, or head north in a much broader pattern. And this is exemplified in the east along the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Actually, many birds will get trapped. This is the Gaspé Peninsula. This is the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the St. Lawrence Seaway here. A lot of birds will get trapped on this peninsula, and they'll kind of wander back and forth during spring migration. They'll get trapped sometimes if they hit just go a little bit too far to the east, maybe pushed by westerly winds. Some birds, and sometimes this actually can have deadly consequences. Golden eagles really tend not to want to cross open water. You can see, I have one bird, he gets stuck here like it's an adult, and every other year or so, sometimes every year, he's coming up and getting stuck and does some crazy attempts at trying to cross. But usually they cross at much the shorter areas, about maybe 20 kilometers at the most. So we've actually lost 2 birds trying to cross the Gulf here. I don't know why they were killed or why they died. They could have been exhausted, or they could have been attacked by bald eagles, which is something that's been observed on Lake Ontario. But you can also see here the orange lines in fall kind of follow that northern shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, like you saw in Lake Superior. So I am fascinated by the movements of young birds. So adults tend to be very predictable in what they do. They go from a small breeding area to a small wintering area, and they go back and forth and do the same thing all the time. But these young birds do something really interesting. So this is an extreme example of a bird who appears to be searching for a fall route. So she's heading north. She started down here in Alabama, and she went up north and she hit Lake Erie. She then turned around, where my cursor goes, she turned around and came all the way back down here to Alabama. And then she went back north again, and then she went west and she hit Chicago and Lake Michigan. And then she turned back to the southeast and stopped here, composed herself, and then headed north. Which this would in subsequent years become her wintering area. She left Alabama and decided that Virginia was a much better place to stay, I guess. But you can see that on her second migration north, she followed a similar route up to the Gaspé Peninsula. And then she did the same thing again the next spring. Unfortunately, she is one of those birds that ended up dying trying to cross the Gulf. And I think, you know, these young birds especially have some drive that pushes them to move north. And that drive to move is really seen in all populations of the young birds. So we see that many young birds, whether from migratory or sedentary population, move around a lot. And so birds that Pete Bloom caught in the Tehachapies for one of our projects, they move north between February to June. And this pattern can be repeated for multiple years, but is not something that's typically seen in adults. And so there's other studies from the Four Corners region where they see similar patterns. And we see the same thing that happens with bald eagles in other areas where young birds will move north until they settle on their breeding areas. So young birds in the east tend to move around a great deal during the summer months. So once they get up on their breeding grounds, these are all different birds, different color representing a different bird, but they move around quite a bit, where you would see an adult holding a small breeding area. And we see that some areas concentrate young eagles. So this area is Kuujjuaq, is this area here, and almost every single young bird that we've tagged has come to this area at one point or time in its lifetime of us tracking it. So there's something that is attracting birds to that area. But this is actually one of our current studies, is looking at why young birds move where they do. Because we see movements of young Alaskan eagles, they move to the North Slope, and there's no breeding birds up there. We really want to understand what's motivating these movements. And we certainly expect that some of it's food motivated, but for Alaska birds, so the difference between Quebec and Alaska, in Quebec, there are breeding birds all over the areas that attract some adults and young birds. But in Alaska, there are no breeding birds up on the North Slope. So it could be not just food motivation, but it could also be reduced competition from breeding adults. So trying to understand what those mechanisms are for these movements in young birds is one focus of a project we have ongoing right now. So like I said, some of these areas concentrate young eagles, and some areas concentrate all ages of eagles. Now, this is only meant, this is Wyoming, and it's only meant to show you that there are a heck of a lot of eagles in this area. But there are consequences for building things like wind turbines in areas that concentrate lots of eagles. So there can be indirect effects. So in the Appalachians, we see habitat alteration, habitat destruction. We see birds avoiding ridges that they would typically migrate along or hunt along because turbines are there. And I think we see some of that out in California as well. But one of the more important effects that we see in places like Altamont Pass, the Tehachapi's, and other areas are direct effects, which are mortality and injury from the birds colliding with wind turbines. So one of our projects was looking at the effect of mortality at Altamont. So in Altamont, if you're not aware, the turbines kill somewhere around 60 or so birds, golden eagles every year, in addition to many other species. And what we found is that the Altamont Pass is essentially an ecological sink. There's apparent stability of the local population, but that stability is maintained by continental scale immigration. So what we did is we used stable isotopes and genetics to determine the origin of birds that were killed at Altamont. So this map here is of stable isotopes. You can look at the composition of stable isotopes in the feathers to determine the potential origin of the birds. And these dots out here are just showing where our samples have come from that we used to build the map. And then from those data and some genetic analysis, we determined that 25% of the mortalities at Altamont were of non-local origin. So they weren't coming from the area immediately around, or in California around the Altamont, they were coming from other areas. And in some cases from several hundred kilometers away. I think the furthest away estimated was something like 800 kilometers. So Altamont and Wyoming, around the Casper, Wyoming, those places attract birds from far away, and mortalities at those places can have continental scale effects. So our primary goal with our research was to understand flight behavior. When we started our Eastern project, we wanted to understand habitat use and flight behaviors so that we could predict risk from wind turbines. So we want to get beyond knowing the effects of the mortalities, but trying to prevent those mortalities. So we started by asking some questions. So what is golden eagle flight habitat? Where are they flying, and when they're going to, and how's their flight affected by habitat? How do topography and weather affect this flight behavior? And then can we use that information to predict risk? And so I talked a little bit about this. How do birds fly? This is rudimentary, maybe you all know this. They typically use powered or flapping flight, and then they use subsidized flight. And large soaring birds tend, especially like a golden eagle, prefer not to flap if they don't have to, because they can conserve energy. So they'll use thermals, soaring and gliding, orographic soaring, dynamic soaring, or contorted soaring. But primarily golden eagles are using thermal lift that's created when warm air rises and you see a bird soaring up, they go to the top of the thermal and they glide off to the next one. Something like this track recorded in the Appalachians. But they'll also use updrafts created by wind hitting a ridge and deflecting upward. So that creates lift that they can use to minimize the energetic cost of flight. And so they'll fly along a ridge using those updrafts and tend to hug a ridge like that. So we've found that eagle flight altitude, not surprisingly, is linked to the landform over which these birds are flying. Modern day wind turbines are 150 to over 200 meters high. When eagles are flying over summits and cliffs, they're flying at altitudes that would put them at the greatest risk of intersecting with a wind turbine. We found that eagle flight altitudes are even this is in California. Eagles are flying lower over higher elevation areas, same thing they're doing in the east, and they're flying lower over areas with rougher topography. So this gives us some insight into where they're potentially at risk. Their flight altitudes are also linked to weather. So we see that as wind speeds increase, eagles change altitude less, which suggests that they're using orographic updrafts. So with our flight behavior, we know that flight altitude responds to topography and weather. So we have a hypothesis that flight altitude response is indicative of changing behavior by eagles. That is, that they're switching use of thermal updrafts to use of orographic updrafts. So overall, their preferred mode of flight is thermal soaring, because thermal soaring is faster, especially when thermals are strong. Even though they have to circle up in a thermal and then glide off, they're traveling a much further distance over the same amount of time than if they were using orographic soaring like they are here. So they want to use thermals if they can, but thermals aren't always available. So that's when they switch to using orographic updrafts. And that is if this topography supports soaring. I don't know what time I'm at, but I hope I'm not doing too bad. So
you're perfect. Take your time.
Okay, so we've used this knowledge about flight behavior to identify high-risk areas in the Appalachian Mountains. So this is a map that came out of my PhD research, and basically the red areas indicate the higher risk areas. And so the idea was really to use these models to identify regional variation in risk of turbines to eagles. And so we have this northern plateau of Pennsylvania, the Allegheny Mountains, and the Ridge and Valley. And we did find that there was regional variation. In general, the Allegheny mountains are lower risk than, say, the Ridge and Valley, where birds are following those ridge tops. And if you look at the proportion of wind turbines in each of the different regions, so each of these pie charts shows the proportion of turbines in the different types of risk areas. So green is the lowest risk and red is the highest risk. And so if you look at a plot of the turbines that are located in higher risk areas, you see that in the Ridge and Valley, Eagles are concentrating along those ridge lines, have the highest risk, whereas in the Allegheny Mountains, there are much fewer turbines that are high risk. And so our idea was to link risk to these individual turbines, and then identify suitable areas for wind turbines that are low risk to eagles. So if a facility had not yet been built, then we could find areas that would be safe at a micro scale, safer to build a turbine. So you could take this turbine and move it into this green area and reduce the risk. That's the theory behind it. So we've taken these ideas that we developed a long time ago, and we are now doing similar modeling efforts in Wyoming. So this is a preliminary risk model that I created for Wyoming. The yellow areas are higher risk and the darker areas are lower risk. But we can overlay the wind turbines here, and we can identify those that we expect to be lower risk and those that we expect to be higher risk. And what we will be doing with these is, because we are getting fatality data for eagles that have died at turbines in Wyoming, we can compare our model to those fatalities and understand if we're getting it right, or if there are some things that we are missing, and then we can take and modify our models to try to account for those differences. So not only do eagles face risks based on where they live, but they also face risks because of what they eat. So because they eat carrion, they're often caught in leg hole traps and snares. This is a major problem in Eastern North America. These 3 bald eagles were found because I thought one of our golden eagles had stopped moving for a while. And so the authorities in Quebec went out to look for our bird, and they found these 3 dead bald eagles. These migratory paths of our eastern golden eagles, there's a zone above that's about 49 degrees latitude. You have the First Nations and people, and below that you have a lot of trapping, of mammal trapping going on. And there's a significant number of golden eagles that get caught in these traps as bycatch. We have had 4 of our tagged golden eagles that we know of die in traps, and we've had one caught in a trap and she was released unharmed. Excuse me. But this is a major problem, and probably one of the higher causes of mortality for our eastern birds. In addition to being exposed to trapping, eagles are exposed to lead ammunition when they feed on gut piles and a deer that may have been injured, or elk, or I think of deer, I don't think of elk or antelope or things like that, but out west you have those too. Any injured animal that may have been shot by a hunter that isn't retrieved. And so they feed on those, and this 20 micrograms per deciliter, some people consider that background, a lot of people consider 10 micrograms background. But in the birds that we've caught and looked at lead levels, we've noticed for many years that they all have some amount of lead in their blood. And a new paper that I'm Vince Slaby, who works for me, We've worked together for about 9 years now. He published a paper in Science last week. Maybe you've seen some of the headlines that approximately 50% of both eagle species nationwide have chronic lead exposure. And importantly, there are demographic effects of that lead exposure. So golden eagle populations are suppressed by about 1% annually. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, that adds up to thousands of birds, over a longer time frame. And that 1% can be the difference, because golden eagle populations are stable or potentially declining. That 1% could tip them from being an increasing more stable population to a declining population, especially in the presence of other types of other things causing mortality. And so one of the things Vince says is that he's done the scientific work, and now he wants to inform hunters about this and do education. And we have some non-lead ammunition voucher programs. Most states in the country, actually everyone except California, does not have a lead ban. And a very effective way to get lead out of the system is through education and voucher programs. And so the Peregrine Fund, through efforts in northern Arizona for condors, were able to get 80% of hunter compliance at switching to non-lead ammunition. So we know that it's an effective method. And so we have a non-lead ammunition voucher program going on in the Shirley Basin in Wyoming, and then also one on a small ranch in Montana. And we hope that to get those voucher programs going on in other states as well. So I think I'm made it. I'm at 58 minutes on my clock here. I don't know when it started, but we have a huge research team. This project is in the East has been going on for a very long time. We have many collaborators and supporters and funding sources and people on our research team there. In the East, or in the West, we have a number of people on our research team and a number of funding sources out there as well. I think, and I think my husband says the same thing, when we started working on golden eagles in the East in 2005, we had no idea what a golden opportunity it was. I had no idea it would lead to a PhD or to a 17-year research project. It's still ongoing, and we continue to learn new things. Our kids have grown up with eagles. Sometimes they don't like it, but I think most of the time they're happy about it. So I want to thank you all for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. Really wonderful. So we're going to open this up to questions. And I know Paul probably has some comments that he'd like to make too, but I would like to just say how important your work is. So yes, you didn't realize what you were getting into maybe, and how long a project this would end up being. But it's because whenever we get into these, we find out how much there is to know and how little we actually do know. And then how many aspects of your work are connecting to other things. So maybe you loved golden eagles and you were just interested in their movements, but that ended up being tied to wind patterns, which ended up being tied to turbines. And then because you care for golden eagles and you were catching them and holding them, you could take blood samples and you could find out how much blood lead there was. And that's connected to, you know, ammunition use throughout the United States. It's impacted condors too. And so I think that all of these projects really become kind of gateway projects for us to immerse ourselves in the lives of these animals. But then also it always comes back to people too. And then look what you're doing to your kiddos. They're having the opportunity. They may be tired of eagles sometimes. Stop talking about them. But look how much they've learned, and look what they're going to be able to share with their kids in the future. So I think these projects are just amazing what they end up opening up. And thank you so much on behalf of Eagles and, you know, for our sake too, for doing this work, because it's so critically important. So yay, maybe everybody's on there.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me share it. I really appreciate it. This was a very fun presentation to put together, because I got to knit the East and the West. So
yeah, that was wonderful. We really appreciate the Western information, but seeing all of the Eastern trends too are important. And Paul, I don't want to run over what you were probably going to say here too after her presentation.
Oh, well, I was just going to, you know, in terms of comment, thanks. It's fascinating to see. I'm sort of stunned from everything I've read. You know, they talk about golden eagles in, you know, oh, there are a few in the Appalachians and things, but the fact that you're seeing so many birds in Alabama, Arkansas, I mean, that just is completely different from what you're kind of led to believe by the conventional range maps and things. It's
yes, definitely. I mean, we looked at the range maps a long time ago, and we're like, there's something wrong with this, but we had no idea how wrong they were. You know,
there are those mainly, from what I could see in the pictures, it looked like a lot of juveniles. Is there differential trap response between adult and young birds, and do you tend to catch more of one than the other?
We've caught a lot of adults. I mean, I would say, we've caught a lot, and I think that trap response tends to be fairly similar. Like, if we have birds, we put out the bait, and then we don't go down to trap until we've had birds on bait. If we get down there and they don't like something about a site, whether it's an adult or a juvenile, they'll go about 3 days, and then on that third day you can almost guarantee you're gonna trap them. They'll come visit and look, and then they'll fly away, and they'll drive you crazy because you're sitting in a freezing cold blind for hours all day, and you have to go to the bathroom and all those things, all those uncomfortable things. But on that third day, they typically will come in and they'll say, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat, and they do, and we tend to catch them. So that happens with juveniles and adults. Yeah.
Well, let's open this up to the listeners' questions just a little bit, and then I know I could probably keep asking you questions all night myself, but we're gonna let, I think, Shantri, you had a question.
Yes, hi, thank you. This was fascinating. I'm so glad I came. I wanted to understand more in terms of, I guess, how much different things cause mortality in terms of relative weight. You had mentioned birds, the golden eagles in Quebec, around areas where First Nations live, being cotton traps, and then you had mentioned the lead poisoning and with termites. So in comparison, how would you rank them in terms of mortality for the birds?
So the birds in Quebec, when they're south of the First Nations, that's when they're getting trapped. When they go up into the First Nations areas, they tend not to be trapped. But the understanding like how many birds actually die of lead poisoning is harder to determine. Through the telemetry, we're getting more exact causes of mortality, but birds tend to be found where people are. So if they die where people are going to find them. So there might be, you know, out west, if a bird is golden eagles hit by a car, they're going to tend to be found more easily than a bird that dies from lead poisoning who might have wandered far from the road, things like that. So, I mean, as far as ranking causes of mortality, if you do it on a nationwide level, electrocutions are the highest that we know. Lead causes mortality, and it also causes sublethal effects. So, but we don't know how much lead poisoning affects fecundity, you know, and things like that, which we have these other long-term effects. I think lead probably has a greater effect on survival than or on mortality than does trapping, but I can't say that for sure in the East. But I will say this, that if you look in the Atlantic flyway, very few birds die of electrocution. So there are regional effects because we have trees, and so eagles will perch in trees rather than on a power pole. When you go out west where there are fewer trees, they tend to get electrocuted more because they like to perch on power poles. I'm not sure I answered your question, but I tried.
No, that was you know, I just have more. I'm more interested. You said south of the First Nations area, so are they? I mean, I don't understand the trapping bit, I guess.
So my understanding is that First Nations people do not do trapping with snares and leg holds, but I guess the French Canadians do a lot of trapping with snares, and one of the problems in Quebec is that they didn't have minimum closures. So a lot of snares. So a snare is intended to go around the head and basically strangle the animal, right? Or catch their leg. I think that's the intention, to catch their leg, right?
For rabbits and for probably martins and
wolves,
those kinds of animals, and wolves. Okay.
Yeah, wolves and foxes and things like that, coyotes. But so they don't have minimum closures on those snares. And so an eagle can get its head through a snare trying to get at the carrion and then get its head stuck and basically strangle it. And so they have been working to make regulations that they have to place the snares a certain distance away from the bait sites to reduce that bycatch. And the same thing with leg holds. I mean, they're just kind of indiscriminate trapping methods, really.
And this has been going on for decades.
Decades, yes.
We've been talking about this since I was first in grad school, and that was from 1989 to 1991.
Yeah.
My master's, and
yeah.
Recommendations have been made about this for years, and it is such a slow process of change.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's better than it was, but it's amazing how resistant that industry is to change.
Yeah.
All right, do we have any other questions? Let's see, there's somebody in the chat. Oh, there's a paper been put in the chat for Dr. Miller for a link so everybody can get to that. Thank you, Randall. Well, I have a question quickly. Maybe this will lead somebody else to think of some too. So, you know, the work that you're doing on learning the golden eagle movements so that you can cite wind turbines more precisely, you know, that might actually have fewer impacts. I think that's tremendously important. But I also know, because I actually used to do surveys at Altamont Pass before they ever even put in the turbines. So I've been, I was on that property a long time ago, and I know that there were eagles there then, and they still ended up situating them there. So I'm wondering how responsive or how willing the wind turbine industry in your area in Eastern United States to consider putting turbines in other places where they will have a lower risk to golden eagles, since most of the wind is blowing in the areas where it's the highest risk.
Yeah, they're not very responsive here. There have been very few mortalities reported in the East. That could be because they're not occurring. It could be because they don't find them, things like that. The pads here are very small compared to the, you have the turbines in the big open areas. So if an eagle gets hit, they're easier to find. Here, if an eagle gets hit, it could be flung into the forest and it's never going to get found. But nonetheless, they're not very responsive here. I think they will be more responsive out west because they're being forced to be, essentially.
Got it.
So the funding for Wyoming came basically because of killing of eagles without a permit to do it. When they get a permit, they have to offset the predicted mortalities by retrofitting power poles.
So these are places where people, those of you who are listening, can get involved as the public. You can make comments on projects. You can write your Congress people. You can get involved through Audubon, National Audubon Society, and your local chapters, both with lead issue, like leaded ammunition, and push for non-leaded ammunition and for more education programs, and for wind turbine control, if you will, because these making mortality searches mandatory is another thing that we've long argued for wind turbine companies, that there should be more specific requirements.
Yes, that it is a very frustrating thing, is just trying to get the mortality data for Wyoming is a huge effort because it's not made publicly available, and topping that is people don't do surveys. They don't do post-construction surveys in many places. And if they do them for a very short time. So that's important. I think the Fish and Wildlife is coming out with some new eagle take rules and in this next 6 months or something like that. And so I think there's a public comment period that will be coming up. And then there's also lots of stuff going on at Altamont all the time. So
yeah, so you can get involved. These are big issues to get involved with. And leaded ammunition affects all kinds of birds, not just eagles, but it affects so many different birds. So I think there's lots of data that show that it's time to replace leaded ammunition. Andrea, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Great presentation, by the way. I'm curious if you have any evidence that for those birds for which you have both, flight behavior is affected by lead contamination, by high levels of circulating lead.
yes, so we have a paper out of Sweden that looked at flight behavior and showed a difference between birds with lead and without.
Yeah, I know the environmental science and technology paper.
Yeah.
But you from your eagles here.
We haven't done that. So, but we certainly have the data that we could look at blood levels and flight behavior. We just haven't done it. If I had all the time in the world, there's so many different things I would love to do. I don't know if you have any students who are interested in doing something like that.
I might.
Yeah. I mean, we have so much data that we'll never be able to answer all the questions that are out there. And we love to collaborate with other people.
I'm trying to do it the same thing with turkey vultures here in
Oh.
California,
Cool.
but I only have a few. I work with Pete as well, with Pete.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
So-
maybe I'll touch base.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great idea. Yeah, the more we can all collaborate on these projects, the better, because none of us has time individually usually to get, you know, the entire project done or the entire set of analyses done. So that's why these kinds of seminars are so useful, because we actually can bring people together, you know. So
Yeah,
that's
thanks
great.
for organizing.
Yeah, it's great if you can talk with Trish then about that. That'd be awesome.
Thank you all for coming.
There's a question came up. You mentioned in passing that you were sexing eagles as part of your processing by measuring toe pad. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how you sex eagles in the field?
You can do it based on foot pad, so how big their foot is from, let me see if I can get back to that slide, and then I can show you. But basically you can stretch their feet out, and I can't remember the exact measurement.
So not the spread of the foot and not even the talon length, simply that the big main pad in the center of the foot is enough bigger.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
you can stretch that and you measure from here to here with it fully extended. Sometimes it's hard to do because they don't always relax. But then we also have genetic samples from every bird to verify those things. Bortolotti published a lot on the differences in size or morphometric differences among eagles.
Right. Wasn't there was one that you needed, that there was a formula that was like Coleman and a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And so because this seems like it'd be a whole lot easier to be able to take a single measurement and have a pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you can honestly, like if you're out, there's some overlap, right? But when you see a foot like that, you know it's a female. Males just don't have a foot that big.
Right.
So,
And do you blood sample routinely every bird at this point for
yeah.
Okay.
Every single bird we catch, whether it's bald eagle or golden eagle, we take blood samples on them and feather samples. And so, I mean, we have some things that we archive and some things that are used to look at, like blood levels.
That's great.
Yeah. So in that science paper, every sample outside of Virginia was taken by Mike and me. I mean, in the East, blood sample.
Worked hard.
Yeah.
Well, you and your kids, it looked like Phoebe did a fair
yes.
amount of the work there.
Phoebe did a lot of work herself. Yes.
So there are a couple more questions also in the chat. I'm going to do one last one and then come back to Chantri's. So Randall asked, he said, thank you so much for your meaningful work. And also, do I understand your findings correctly that younger golden eagles do not have to be as efficient as older birds in terms of optimization in their migration choices and flight behavior and the timing, etc.?
So younger birds, they can adjust their timing to utilize updrafts, so thermal updrafts. So an adult, so spring migration is the best example. During spring migration, adults need to get to the breeding grounds as soon as they can. And so they will leave despite the conditions. They're probably engaged in a lot of powered flight to get up there, but subadults and juveniles, because they're not in a rush to get there, they can wait until they have good conditions to fly. And so they can save their energy. So they're more focused on survival. Adults are more focused on overall fitness and producing young. So if that answers that question. Yeah.
Sounds like it. And then also Shanshri asked again, just kind of still on the leaded ammunition question or issue, whether there are hunter associations in the East, similar to the ones that we had out here that help reduce lead in California, you know, for on behalf of the condor. Are there some hunter associations that are working, you know, to help educate hunters? I think you mentioned one, but she might be interested, or they might be interested.
So there's the North American Non-Lead Partnership, which was led by Chris Parrish. They work all over the country. There are some, I don't know that they're exactly hunter associations, but there are other organizations trying to do education and outreach to help with that as well. I am not the expert on that. And if you're interested, I can put you in touch with Vince, who's much more knowledgeable about those things than I.
Thank you. I was curious about like what the, like I think I was asking the hunter stuff for the East is to understand why there's resistance regarding the snares and the trapping. Like I mean, if it's organized and there's associations, then it doesn't seem like it would require that much just to create distance. Like it's not a, so I'm just like puzzled. Like I don't understand why there is resistance.
I think it's just this is the way we've done it for years kind of attitude. Why do we have to change, sort of thing, right? With lead ammunition, it's a whole another ball of wax about yeah. So I mean, we try to avoid that controversy by giving hunters a choice to make the right choice, right? Informing them so they can make the right choice. But I mean, honestly, there are a lot of trappers that are mortified that they have an eagle in their trap, and they'll, you know, I mean, we've tagged birds that have been caught in traps because hunters were responsible and didn't kill the bird, or didn't just let it go. Rather, they took it to rehab if it was hurt, you know, things like that. So there are a lot that care, and that maybe just don't realize that they could do something differently. And that's the same thing with hunters and lead ammunition. Most hunters don't have a clue this is happening. And I think we're hoping by having this paper published in Science that it lets those people know that they can have a positive effect on eagle conservation. So knowledge is key. And you're always going to have people who are hard-headed and don't want to change.
Well, for what it's worth, when the you know, lead has been banned in this country since what, the 1990 or something for waterfowl hunting.
Even earlier.
And at the time, or is it 1980? Maybe
70.
it's even
I
further.
think that the ban actually went into place in 90 or 91. So it was a battle through the 80s to get it to happen in the first place.
But there was a tremendous amount of resistance to that as well, just because, you know, not because hunters wanted to continue poisoning the environment, but because they were familiar with the ballistics and steel shot was going to behave differently. And so all of a sudden they wouldn't be as good of hunters as they had been. And they fought it and they dragged their feet, and there was enormous resistance. And then once it went into place, steel ammunition and other alternatives became much cheaper, and people learned the ballistics involved. And now for 20, 30 years, anybody that's hunted waterfowl has never used lead ammunition, and they don't know the difference, and they're fine with it. And
Right.
and the same thing will probably happen, but it's just an agonizingly slow process to get people to change their mind from what, lead is incredibly cheap. That's one problem, is
Yeah.
that it's in the interest of the manufacturers to keep selling the thing that's cheapest, that they can sell the most of and make the most money.
Yeah.
But it will change slowly. And once people realize that it isn't any different and it's actually better, then they'll go along with it. But it's like pulling teeth to get them to change their minds the first time.
Yeah. I was actually surprised. I started talking to my uncle about this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I changed to copper like years ago, and because it's better." He didn't even know about the whole problem with lead and eagles and wildlife, but it's like, I did it because of the ballistics. So, that's whole part of the education process too. So.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Any other questions out there? If not, we can let Trish get to bed. I don't think we said where you actually are. Trish is joining us from Cape May. If anybody's familiar with that name. So.
Yeah, I couldn't be much further from you guys. Still be in the US. But
Well, thank you again so much for your time. And it may seem like these presentations, you hurry and you put it all together and you give it to us, and then it seems like it goes away, right? Because you move on with the things that are going on in your life. But you've left us with a lot of information to think about. You've left us with some impressions of the amount of data that you've collected and the numbers of eagles you've tracked, and an idea of how they're actually moving and the nuances of those movements and the intricacies of those movements. And so that sticks with us. And also we know that you're publishing papers, and so now we can dig into the literature more. So really, this does help. You're spreading information, and it will stick with us. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. If anybody's interested in that paper, that science paper, you can get it on our website freely if you go under our team members and look at Vince Slaby's page, and there's a link to that paper. So
okay, do we have your website?
here, let me get it, and I'll put it in the chat.
In the chat, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually volunteering at the LA Zoo with condors maybe like a few months ago, and they were all upset about the whole lead situation, and he actually said jokingly that someone needs to do, or one of the people there said that someone needs to do some eagles with lead poisoning, and then maybe people will start caring.
I know it is sad that we've known about this for so long, and it takes something like an eagle, and most of them are bald eagles too, that most of the news on that is focused on bald eagles, but the effect on golden eagles is probably greater, simply because their populations are smaller.
And again, we've known that blood lead is an issue for raptors, birds of prey, for quite a while now too. So it's definitely time to work. Well, it's always time. There's so many issues for all of our wildlife, all over the world, that they're the items that they're exposed to and impacts that they're exposed to. But at least we're now better informed about this. And Luke, you can go back to the zoo and let them know that this is already well known, that this is an issue. But it's nice to know that there's somebody at the other end of the country who's working on it from that end too, right? We can all eventually maybe bring this issue enough attention so that it actually gets addressed adequately. So thank you again, Trish.
Yeah.
Paul, I'll let you sign us out because you're the one who found this wonderful.
Okay.
who Gave us this great presentation.
I was just climbing a mountain in Nevada and just ran into her. It was the strangest, it was the strangest thing. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, Trish. I really appreciate it. Great to see you again, and Mike. And we'll be in touch. We won't let it be another 25 years before I say hello again. So
Great. Thanks so much, Paul.
Trish. Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Wonderful.
all right. Good night,
Thank
everybody. Thanks for
you.
coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Oh, let's see. I should stop the recording.
Just find out where the leave button is.
Go away.